tufanye kazi pamoja na tukue pamoja. Kuimarisha Kenya ni jukumu la Kenya.
Very good afternoon to you and welcome to the Farm Kenya Show. My name is Nokip Kimboy and today we are having an interesting conversation. You know, the way we talk about conservation of the environment, when you talk about sustainability in our productions and making the world a better place, this has to be done strategically. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to enact changes within value chains and ecosystems so that we create sustainable systems. And that's why our conversation today touches on the value chain. If at all you are selling anything outside the country and specifically to the EU, they are pretty particular. They have enacted policies that will be going down into it to try and understand. They call it the EU Deforestation Free Regulation, or EUDR. It's an acronym that has been going around from around 2020, post-2020 within the local scene. And the question is, how are these regulations enacted? Another thing, why is it important? Why does it matter? And are our farmers in the local ecosystem able to adhere to these regulations, if at all they want to access the EU market? I have experts in studio with us, and we are in safe hands. Gentlemen, I always say I enjoy the gender balance in this conversation, yeah? But definitely, Brian King, thank you very much for making time. Brian King is from the Alliance of Biodiversity International, and he'll tell us more about that. And we also have George Watene. George Watene, I don't know whether this changed, but programs manager at Global Coffee Platform. Definitely. If you want a good coffee, George Watene is the guy to talk to. So, gentlemen, welcome to this conversation. For starters, let us lay the foundation, because the issue about the European Union Deforestation Free Regulation, it's a regulation that has been discussed out there. And today we are starting on a clean slate of understanding this. And I'll start with you, Brian. When you talk about EUDR, what is it exactly? What are the foundations? What is the origin of these regulations?
The EU Deforestation Regulation, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here. The EU Deforestation Regulation is requiring a degree of sort of due diligence that producers, actually importers of coffee, cacao, cattle, soy, timber, and and rubber as well, actually. Yeah, there's 7 commodities. And it's creating this kind of shockwave across the global value chains for all of those commodities at a global scale. And EUDR at its heart is kind of a trade regulation. So the EU, as is its right, regulating what will come across its borders, and by extension, what will consumers consume in those markets. And so it's the only regulation that I've ever heard of that uses the word polygon. And by polygon, in the context of that regulation, actually means the boundary, the actual outline of an agricultural field where a particular product came from. And so, you know, the importers, the ones who are actually bringing product into the EU, have a really high burden of sort of proof or due diligence that they're not bringing products in that have contributed to deforestation after a cutoff date in 2020.
Oh, okay. So the cutoff date was 2020. And essentially, it's sort of tracing where a particular product is coming from. George, I'm trying to think about this because Kenya and agriculture is one of those conversations. We say agriculture is the backbone of this country and the economy. And one of the ways is exporting. The export market has played a huge role in this. When the regulations landed, and all of a sudden, it's like, we need to know where you're growing your coffee. Talk to me. The previous regime where we are operating and now this Nexus regulation landing, was it a major difference for sector players, specifically coffee where you are?
When the regulation landed, because it was adopted in 2023, in June 2023, and then initially it was to be applied as early as 1st of January 2025, But luckily, last year in October, there was a push to the end of this year. But when it landed, two things. First, there was denial. And I remember a meeting that was held in Nairobi, all Africans saying, no, we won't give them that information. But then we went to the next step where people realized we are talking about a market. And for Kenya, we are talking about 55% of the coffee market going to the EU for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so, when they looked at that, then countries started going back on themselves and then looking at and seeing, what they would have done. So for Kenya, what happened is traceability to the level of the plot wasn't there. What we had is you could trace it back because most farmers are members of a cooperative. Mm-hmm. So you could trace the coffee back to the cooperative factory all the way to export, and we knew that. So when you hear coffee is coming from a cooperative, Kapngetuni, for instance, then you know exactly the farmers that are part of that cooperative. But now the shock was they didn't only want to know what factory it has come from, they wanted to know the plots of the farmers that are part of that. Mm. And in a country where you have about 800,000 smallholders, then that's quite a huge number of points. Mm-hmm. So that's where the shock came in. So we had a bit of the traceability all the way to the factory, but now to the plot, that's the crux of the matter.
That's quite interesting because they need to know where this was planted. And this brings me to Mr. King. The requirements of this regulation. I know one that has come, especially the big shocker was we need to know your plot. Talk to me about the requirements of this regulation and what informs these requirements. Of course, the goal is to make sure that the products is traced and to ensure that deforestation was not the foundation of production of this particular batch.
So I think the requirements, the most immediate actors that need to comply are those who are bringing the product into the EU. But they need to present a due diligence statement, and there's actually a database on the EU side where you submit those statements. And that statement needs to be able to point to a deforestation risk analysis, and you need to be able to point to the specific points or polygons. And so this is actually requiring a higher degree of collaboration and coordination at the level of value chains that I think has probably ever been seen. So really the actors who are probably most worried about it are the ones who will be fined when they actually have to go into the EU. And I think it's really significant fines, like a percentage of turnover. Okay. But at its core, it's having real locations and having a sort of deforestation check about those locations. Mm-hmm. Now, who does that? Ultimately, every country has the sovereign right to decide what are the maps they want to use, who's going to analyze, who's going to approve, give the thumbs up or thumbs down if deforestation happened or not. And that's still quite very much in flux right now, although government of Kenya is going ahead very quickly in establishing the reference map, and and the mandates are pretty clear about who kind of owns that function from government side. So, it's as I said, it's a trade regulation that governs the EU, but they also know that there's a kind of environmental stewardship goal about it, but it also requires countries to kind of get on the same page at the level of industry, to kind of rise to the challenge.
Definitely. I mean, George, I can imagine all of a sudden there is this demand of information that initially I wasn't supposed to, it wasn't a thought. Yeah. And now you want to know the plot where I'm growing my product and whether it is, a product of deforestation. Yes. And I'm trying to think, because you talked about smallholder farmers, and these are a lot, 800,000. And when you mentioned that, thank God, the activation date has been moved forward to the end of this year. Why is it so difficult to avail this information? Is it hard to find, as Brian puts it, depending on the jurisdiction like Kenya operating, is it difficult to ascertain these areas where we are growing our products? What's the challenge there?
To answer that, because one of the reasons they need that point is so that when they look at it, they can confirm this area. When they look at the 2020 map, they can confirm there was no forest. So they need that point to be able to do that due diligence themselves. But the challenge was, first, of course, the technology. And part of the work that we are doing is, as Brian was mentioning, is showing that you have open source tools. I mean, you don't need to pay a lot for those tools to collect that. So the first part was the technology. The second part was the accuracy. Because in discussions with some of the people that will check, if I send a list and one of the points was on a house or on a road or on a river, then it makes the whole list then wrong or something like that. Mm-hmm. So you need the accuracy to say, if this is Brian's farm, this is the point, this is where the coffee is. And what we've seen from some of the trials that have happened, if you send someone and they have the wrong gadget in getting that point, because we have, for those that follow GPS, there's the issue of accuracy. Mm-hmm. If I have an accuracy of up to 4 kilometers, I could be standing here and taking a point, but we are talking about something that is a GM. Mm-hmm. So that has been one of the challenges. So you need to send people to the field that understand the fact that I have to be very accurate. The other issue was the EU even set accuracy levels for that point. So it has to be 6 decimal places. In the past, you have people who used to collect, but they would collect it to 2 decimal places, 4 decimal places. So the fact that they even set accuracy, it means if I am not, I give you points, but they're not as accurate as the EU requires, then it still doesn't meet that. So those were some of the issues. And look, and talking to some of the stakeholders, talking about the cost, even cooperatives, because some cooperatives have tried to collect the data for themselves. I mean, I was talking to some in Kirinyaga that were telling me they are spending somewhere between, $2 to $5, depending on how far the farmer is when they go to him, and also depending on who they send. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the challenges that make it an expensive activity. Okay. And even when you listen to some of the other countries like Uganda has a bit more farmers than we do. I mean, they're talking about 2 million farmers. But they've had to send, because then the data has to be standardized, because you can't collect data and then you give it to a buyer and then it's not right. As Brian was mentioning, there's a fine, which is a percentage of that buyer's revenue that then the EU will put on him. So that part of first ensuring the accuracy of the information then adds to the cost.
Okay. Accuracy and cost. Brian King, are you experiencing other challenges that our farmers with EUDR?
Well, I mean, there's a potential unintended consequence of this regulation, in that very large actors, companies, in the case of the coffee sector, the big producing countries like Colombia or Brazil, kind of largely have it sorted out. They've got their georeferences, they have well-worn processes by small producers who are less equipped to be able to comply. And so that's where our collaboration with Kenya Coffee and Global Coffee Platforms come in. We're a research institute working in kind of public interest ag research to try to see, okay, well, what's the fit of digital technologies and the problem we're trying to solve? And so that's where we've landed on this question of open technologies, and it's also really helpful when you work with open technologies. You can ask different actors, public, private, nonprofits, large and small, to set aside for a moment their kind of competitive interests and think about their shared interests and like how do we solve the problem.
So there is spark and collaboration. That aspect of bringing the cost down definitely is a big one. Initially, George, how would, because we've had since 2023 until now, we have a few months to the end of the year. Talk to me about that progress, and even this element of costing that has been a concern for a lot of farmers and cooperatives, to be able to fully be at par with these regulations. because come 2026 is a totally different ball game. Where are we a few months to the end of the year?
So on that one, and it even gets more complicated because to get a container from Mombasa to Antwerp takes you about 45 days, which then means any container that is leaving Mombasa after November 15th will most probably reach Europe when the regulation is in force. So it will need that information. So actually our deadline has even been brought further because of the time it takes to send there. But looking at it, two parts. One, the collaboration. And actually the beauty is this year's International Coffee Day next week. It's talking about the power of collaboration. So the issue of collaborating. So first, the farmers needed to collaborate as part of a cooperative. If we are getting that information, how do we ensure we are putting it together? But then also, the private sector also realized they cannot collect all that data by themselves. Yes, they can collect a few, but then what that does, it creates imbalances. I collect on the easy areas, but then it means I can only put this coffee from the easy areas into the EU, and that from the more difficult areas won't get it into the EU. So then there needed to be also a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, so that the government, because the government is thinking about Kenyan coffee, they are not thinking about what you're taking. They want to ensure that all of Kenya's coffee has access to that particular market. So then it got to a point where there's a national working group on EUDR that also brings the private stakeholders into that, and also has the associations of the farmers in place. And here is where then they were thinking, what has been done, what has not been done, and how do we ensure that then the resources can be put together to then make sure by November 15th, anyone who is buying coffee to export to the EU can do that, because then they have the right information.
Okay.
But that...
I mean, as you've said, the deadline has just moved closer. And again, I'm looking at the impact, because brand new, you talk to farmers, farmer organizations, and you're trying, the point is lower the cost and make sure that there is much coverage, adherence to the EUDR. So far from the collaborations that you've been doing with the farm organizations, how open are they when it comes to open technology, as you put it, and adaptability?
I mean, there's definitely a trust building element that must happen, and you know, and there's a responsibility. There's an ethical and fiduciary responsibility if you're going to be interacting with data of farmers, about their farms. You know, they need to understand why. You need to reinforce their right of consent over use of those data. A lot of times there's a relationship with a cooperative that kind of manages that, but it's the farmers that give that right to a cooperative to manage their data for them. And so, it's kind of working through building trust at multiple levels and in multiple ways, and actually even sort of expanding that kind of circle of trust. When you're working with folks that farmers are trusting, then you kind of build it up from there. There's actually there's a picture I shared. I don't know if we're going to be able to show it or not. That actually I think demonstrates something about how, in fact, it is possible.
Okay.
I see me. Maybe we've got it. We'll see.
All right. It's not yet up.
Okay.
But we're going to be bringing it later on.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Good.
definitely. But initially, it's to demonstrate how tech can be utilized to sort of bridge this.
Yeah, and to show that public, private, nonprofit, large actors, small actors can get on the same page about their shared interests, and that open technologies can help us to actually do something about that, to build some shared services or solutions that will have the effects we're talking about of driving down cost. And just to not forget that we also need to keep that agency, that consent aspect, live there, because it's data about individuals, it's data about their livelihoods.
Yes.
And so they have a right to say, who can see that and who shouldn't be seeing that.
And we're going to demonstrate that later on, which is very fascinating. I mean, there is a whole coffee truck and you're able to scan, and, which is super, super cool. We'll see that and the power of technology and all this. But even as we do that, we are in an age where, and in a country where, somebody was sued because they are out there in having fun, and somebody took the photo and posted. Science like, you guys are gonna pay me 2 million, but why did you take that photo of me and post it without my consent? And it talks about data, because they say data is the new oil. Our farmers, is there sensitization on their part to understand what information is being offered, the implication of that? And so far, how has that journey been, if at all there is this sensitization, push?
Actually, I was talking to a friend before this, and they were saying they've had it on vernacular radio and TV in terms of farmers being informed that there are people coming to collect the data. There's even a hashtag, EUDR Ready Kenya, that is going on just to try and sensitize them. But the other beauty is the same rules we have on data in Kenya and our Data Privacy Act. There's even a stronger one in the EU. So which then meant the data they are requiring is first anonymized. They just need the plots, and they don't need like the other information about the farmer. So they don't need the farmer's name, they don't need details about the farmer, just points that then tell this particular point. If you look at older maps all the way till 2020 or 2019, there was no forest before that. So that part has helped. But again, and even for yourself, if someone came to your home and told you, we want to take the GPS of your home so that then, but we'll not share your name. There's a bit of that, and which is what Brian was talking about, trust building. So I think also for the government, there's been a bit of trust building. And at the end of the day, the only challenge is, I think the EU happened to be one of our best markets in the country. So they pay above the average price that we get as a country, and they also take a lot of that coffee. Because I remember at the beginning, Africans were saying, we'll not even export to the EU, we can export to newer markets. But then when you look at the report that comes from AFA and the economic report also, it shows the average price of some of these EU countries is very high compared to some of the other countries. So you don't want to lose that. So I think also when you're sensitizing the farmers, and especially now that the prices, I mean, when you listen to the auction this week even, I mean, the prices are going quite high compared to a few years ago. When you tell the farmers the fact that this market that we want to keep is the one that then translates into these high prices, I think the farmers also get to a point where they understand it's a contractual activity. I could choose not to give, but then I lose the market. And so for most, and especially the ones that know they have very good coffee and they are fetching good prices, many of them are agreeing to, but just to sharing the point, not to sharing their own personal data.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very important. I mean, Brian, in life we need leaders, then others follow. And I'm looking at some of this regulation, even in the regulatory world. Such standard starts to trickle down. So even these markets, alternative markets that we're looking into, it's likely in the next 1, 2, 3 years, they'll also enact similar regulation. So this thought about diversifying, if those standards are too difficult, we can still look at alternative markets. Is it a common phenomena that you've interacted with, even as you push, solutions in this space?
I think it's fair to say that there's a general trend toward regulations that affect what is considered to be sort of responsible behavior in agricultural supply chains, and not just this one. It's quite possible that other countries would adopt something similar. Other consuming countries, we could say, will adopt these. It's obviously not the only market in the world. It's a very big and interesting market for these commodities. So I don't know. Based on the last 10 years or so, I think the trend is toward regulations that try to require a bit more transparency or responsibility within supply chain. So things like, labor or other responsible behaviors, other aspects of environmental stewardship, and so forth. And so this is one example, and I think there's a kind of trend line towards this happening. So yeah, there are other markets, but overall, I think the trend is has been going this way.
Definitely. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I think now we focus more on the solution that we're trying to offer, this gap when it comes to, making sure that farmers, there is transparency in the whole regulatory environment, which is very, very critical. That's what we're going to be doing. In studio, I have Brand King from the Alliance of Biodiversity International, and I also have Mr. George Watena, Program Manager at Global Coffee Platform, talking about EUDR, European Union Deforestation Free Regulation. And stay tuned. Right after this break, we continue with this conversation.
Tufanye kazi pamoja na tukue pamoja.